As the movie told us a little bit about, the sea otter population used to be continuous all the way around the northern Pacific coastline. There weren't these breaks in the population that you see here. It was just one continuous population until the fur trade hunted. And that's where we find these different populations of sea otters. And it's broken down into southern sea otters and northern sea otters. And then it's further broken down into Russian, Alaskan, and California sea otters. And to make it even more confusing, we took some of these sea otters from northern California and Alaska, and researchers and scientists translocated them, and we have some populations off of southeast Alaska, Canada, and Washington. So that's kind of how the populations break down. Now, the population they were talking about in the movie is all right down here in Southern California. Those are the California sea otters. And that population only has about 2,700 animals in it. The entire population of sea otters once ranged about 300,000 animals before the fur trade, and they were almost entirely wiped out. But we have seen those populations rebound a little bit. Now, before I tell you about how we take care of sea otters as humans, I thought I would tell you a little bit about how the experts do it. The sea otter moms spend about 6 to 8 months together. At the end of that time, the sea otter pups are weaned. They've learned a lot from mom in that time. They've learned how to dive and forage and collect prey on their own. When they are born, they only weigh about 3 to 5 pounds. They're quite tiny. And you can see they have that really, really thick coat, what we call natal pelage. They cannot physically dive. They're so buoyant because that coat is so thick. They're like little corks that float on the water. And so they use mom as a little raft. So mom keeps them safe, dry, helps them groom, and they do nurse for that entire time until they're weaned. And so you can see the pup is nursing on the mammaries, which are on the lower abdomen of the sea otter mom. At about 3 months, I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback, about 3 months of age, the pups will lose that, they will lose that furry pup fur. They'll lose the pup fur, and they'll be able to start diving and following mom to learn how to collect prey on the ocean. So if something happens to mom in these early weeks, that pup isn't going to make it. They can't physically dive to the bottom of the ocean to collect the food that they make, or that food that they need. And so that's where people come in. That's where the rehabilitation centers come in, like the Monterey Bay Aquarium that we've learned a lot about in the movie, and then the Alaska Sea Life Center that's in Seward, Alaska, and that is where all of our pups had their start, so to speak. Now, Monterey Bay is one of several rehabilitation centers along the coast of California, but they were the first to rehabilitate sea otters. Starting in 1984, they rehabilitated the first sea otters and sea otter pups, and that's what they specialize in. They do sea otters, and they do sea otters really well. They put a lot of effort into not only rehabilitating them, but as you saw in the movie, doing the research and the follow-up so that we know what happens to these otters once they're back in the wild. They don't consider a release successful when they raise one of these sea otter pups until that pup has offspring. So they have a pretty stringent guideline as far as what their success, measure of success is. And so they'll follow these pups out in the wild for quite some time. Now, I think it is important to note that the goal of any rehabilitation center is to get the animals back out to the wild. You take them to these distressed, sick, ill animals, and you help them out because you want to do what is good for the greater good of the whole wild population. But whenever you are working with sick or injured animals, you're going to have a contingent of animals that are non-releasable. And that's where facilities like the Minnesota Zoo come into play. Now, the main difference between Monterey Bay Aquarium and Alaska Sea Life Center is Monterey Bay Aquarium has that permanent exhibit of female sea otters. Those are the sea otters that help out in their surrogate program, and that those surrogates help raise the pups. Now, the Alaska Sea Life Center doesn't have a permanent collection of female sea otters to do a surrogacy program, So they know when a baby sea otter comes in that they need to find a home for them. And that's why Capers, Jasper, and Rocky came to the Minnesota Zoo. They found these little guys. We have learned that if they imprint on people, they don't do very well being released back into the wild. And so as soon as these little guys come into the Sea Life Center, they're looking for homes for them at zoological facilities. And so this is the range of area that the Alaska Sea Life Center works in. There was not an Alaska Sea Life Center prior to 1998. It was the Exxon Valdez oil spill that made it really evident that Alaska needed a rescue center. So funds from that settlement of the Exxon Valdez oil spill went to help in the opening and building of the Alaska Sea Life Center. And so they respond to any calls for rescued marine mammals, seabirds, any sort of aquatic life along the entire coast of Alaska. Now, there's not a lot of people out here finding any sort of animals, so the bulk of the animals are coming in from southeast Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, those areas where there's more people to encounter these sick and stranded animals. And so this is where our boys came from, was that Alaskan coastline. Capers is our oldest. Just for a frame of reference, Seward is right there. That is where the Alaska Sea Life Center is. And then Capers and Jasper were found on that Kenai Peninsula, so they had a pretty quick trip to the Sea Life Center. Rocky was found way down in the southeast peninsula of southeast peninsula of Alaska. So he had a little bit of a journey getting to the Alaska Sea Life Center. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about each one of our boys' stories. This is Capers. He was the first sea otter that we knew was going to be housed here at the Minnesota Zoo. He was found in 2006, and at that time the Minnesota Zoo was just starting to build our sea otter exhibit and starting the plans of opening our sea otter exhibit, which didn't open until 2008. And so we knew we needed animals, and so when Capers came in, there's a group of folks involving the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, other people in this that work with sea otters that make recommendations where these little guys should go. And we were building a brand new facility, so Capers was the first otter we knew that was going to be coming to the Minnesota Zoo. Now his story is pretty straightforward. He was found when he was just a couple days old, and he was floating next to the carcass of a deceased female. So he was taken to the Alaska Sea Life Center pretty quickly. They figured that was mom, and on necropsy, or animal autopsy, they did find out that that female was lactating. So something happened to mom. Capers was brought into the Sea Life Center. As I said, he came in 2006. Minnesota Zoo was just building our facility here. So he lived for a while at Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, and that's where Capers and I met. So we both traveled here from Chicago. He was destined to be here, and I shortly followed after as I took on the position that I currently have. And so the rest of the slides, videos, pictures have a lot to do with Jasper and Rocky, but I don't want you to forget about Capers because him and I go way back. And the following summer, Jasper was discovered. He was totally by himself. He had kind of washed up on the high tide line. Some kayakers found him. They made some phone calls to the Alaska Sea Life Center and put that rescue into place. He made it safely to the Alaska Sea Life Center, and while the Minnesota Zoo had one little one-year-old male pup, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and everybody that makes the decisions as to where the otter pups go decided, you know what, he'd be a great companion animal for Capers. And so we were making plans. I had the opportunity to go to Alaska to meet this little guy, and I was going to bring him back home with me. And while we were making those plans and arranging my trip and his transport back, we got word that Rocky had joined him at the Alaska Sea Life Center. And I remember telling my supervisor, hey, wouldn't it be great if we brought both of these little guys back with me? Because, you know, we have the staff anyway. How much more work can it be to raise 2 otter pups? Well, we soon found out it's a lot more work to raise 2 otter pups. So, Rocky came in at the beginning of August. He made his long journey from southeast Alaska. I actually have a picture of him sleeping by somebody's toilet on a bath mat. He had to spend a night at somebody's home while they were on the phone with the Alaska Sea Life Center going, what do we do? How do we take care of this little guy? He had a pretty rough start. He almost didn't make it, but the folks from the center got down there, stabilized him, and got him back to the center. And this is kind of what they look like when you find them. They're not in that great of condition. This was little Jasper in the little tote right there. They're kind of scruffy. Rocky spent part of the day on a boat before he got back and they could call the center. And the first thing you want to do is stabilize them. You need to assess their hydration, their nutrition levels, you take their weight, you assess them for any disease process or injury, see if they are candidates for rehabilitation, and then, however you can, you get them back to the Sea Life Center. And, sorry, I'm going to catch up on my notes here. I know I'm forgetting to tell you something. So, once they come in, that's the first thing you want to do is make sure that the pups are stabilized. And at this age, and because they've been separated from mom for a little bit, they can be very touchy. The thing about sea otters is that they can get cold really fast and hypothermia can set in. Those coats get wet and saturated, they haven't eaten, they get really cold very fast. The other touchy thing about sea otters is they can overheat and get hot really fast. So you have to constantly be taking their temperature, not, once they're dry and fluffy, not be doing a lot of cuddling. You don't want them to overheat, and making sure that they get the proper nutrition and the hydration that they need. Now, when these little guys come in, they're eating every 2 hours. So every 12 hours, we're offering them this formula that you can see Capers taking right there in the little bottle, and we saw that in the movie as well. We make this formula every day. After 24 hours, we throw it out. We want it to be good quality for the sea otter pups, and this is what they're eating. Some clams, squid, dextrose, some vitamins, some LRS solution for hydration, and then we throw some half and half in there because it's good fat for them, fat and calories to bulk them up a little bit. Oh, this is a video of the Sea Life Center. This is a little tub that the pups swim in. Those little bins down there, that's what they go potty in. If you put their butts in the water, they just go potty. It's kind of amazing. And this is their nursery area. They each have a little crib. And there's Rocky, busy playing with some toys. In the bottom of the crib is actually an air mattress, but what we do is fill that air mattress with water. It helps them to stay cool, because once they're dry and fluffy, again, you don't want them to overheat. You can see one of the staff up there is making a bottle for them. That's where we groom them, on that little table, and then she's getting ready to do the feed. Each and every feed we weigh out to the nearest, or to the exact gram that we want that animal to get. I'll tell you a little bit about how we figure out the amount of food that they need. Jeff, is there anything I can do to keep this from skipping? No? Okay, we'll just watch it like this. Okay, we'll just watch. It's cute anyway. And so this is Jasper. He's taking his bottle. Middle of the night feeds, we tend to kind of have to wake them up because they're probably sleeping. And that actually worked out to our benefit with Rocky. Rocky is the only sea otter pup that I have ever met that didn't like his bottle. So we had kind of a hard time getting him to take the formula, and again, he needed it every 2 hours. So we would try to find him when he was sleeping. We would swaddle him in a towel, and then we would try to feed him his bottle and slip it in his mouth before he realized what was happening. Because sea otters have those little arms, and they pop out everywhere. And most most of the time, the sea otters learn that bottle's good, and they'll actually even learn to hang on to it and feed themselves. Rocky tried to push that thing away all the time, and so we called it the Rocky burrito because we would have to wrap him in this little towel, otherwise the paws came up and you had no chance of getting that bottle into him. So this is how we figure out how much food they need for the day. We weigh them several times a day. We take their daily weight and we multiply that by 35%. We want them to take in 35% of their body weight every day. And then we divide that by the number of feeds. So on this particular day, Rocky on August 4th was now eating every 3 hours. So we took his body weight, which was about 7.8 pounds. We multiplied that by 35% and found out he needed 1,225 grams over 8 feeds throughout the day. And I calculated he was eating almost 3 pounds of food, and he only weighed about 8 pounds. So he was eating a lot of food. And then slowly you wean them off the formula by introducing solid food. So we slowly transition this to about 30% of formula and 5% of solid food. We first start feeding them clam and squid, the fish that they're used to getting in their formula, and that's how you wean the pup off the formula onto the solid food. And this is a video of Jasper and how we weighed them. So we weighed them multiple times a day to get their body weight. At this point, he's getting a little bit bigger, and he won't just sit on that scale. So we got creative. We put him in a little tub, and we fed him a little bit so we could get a good weight on him. But sea otters don't sit still for very long. They're constantly exploring their environment, checking out things like his paper, his scale. It's like, I don't really want that clam anymore, get it out of my face. And they gain weight really fast. I took some of the weights from Rocky over his first year and then up through today. So on July 31st, when he came into the Alaska Sea Life Center and the rehabilitation program, he weighed just over 7 pounds. 1 week later, he had gained almost a pound, and then the subsequent weights are every month. So from one of his first weights on August 6th to a year later, he had gained 50 pounds in that first year. So they grow really fast. And today, he is our biggest sea otter, weighing in at over 74 pounds. Exercise is really important. They have a lot of milestones that they need to reach, and they do this by exploring their environment. That's not me. I thought I did that, but I didn't do it. So we give them toys, things like that to manipulate, play with. Putting toys on the bottom of the pool can encourage them to dive down onto the bottom of the pool. That is? I'm not doing that? Okay, so this next video, hopefully they'll play for us. This was Rocky when he was about 4 weeks old, and this is just super cute. He, again, they can't dive. That fur is so fluffy and buoyant. It's great because it keeps them on the surface of the water, and they can't drown, but they can't get to the bottom where all the food is. So he has to learn how to swim. He's paddling around, trying to figure out what those back flippers are for. And eventually we graduate them from these shallow pools to the deeper pools. Are we starting over? Going? That's fine. All right. This one had a little bit of sound on it because you could hear Rocky vocalizing, and in the background you could hear Jasper vocalizing back. So it was these screams back and forth. And that vocalization is really useful for them in the wild because that's how moms will locate the pups after they dive down to forage and come back to the surface of the water. This is Jasper. He's playing with a toy, and they're learning to manipulate things in the water. This video also shows how they reach those milestones they were talking about in the movie, where they have to learn to swim, then they have to learn to dive. Eventually, they learn to dive to the bottom of the pool. We start them in these shallow tubs because it's safer. They can't really dive very well, and so we start them in the shallow pool and gradually introduce them to a deeper pool. So this was the first time Jasper had seen this deep pool. It was about 5 feet deep. I got into the rehabilitation center on this day, and the coordinator said, hey, there's that pool available if you want to see what Jasper will do. And he's trying to dive to the bottom, but he can't quite make it. You can see he has a little bit of the pup fur still on his head. He has that white cap. So he has almost shed his entire pup coat. Do you guys want to keep watching this? It's pretty choppy. Maybe? Or I could fast forward onto the next slide. Well, at the end of this video, you finally see Jasper diving all the way to the bottom of the pool and coming up with a treasure off of the bottom. And this was little Rocky getting in the water for the first time in that deep pool, and his flippers just aren't doing what he wants them to do. So after they exercise, they swim, then it's time to groom. We need to help them take care of that thick coat, make sure they dry off, and make sure they're learning how to groom on their own. So we put them on these white fluffy towels, and we help them groom. We dry that undercoat. We use the white fluffy towels. We have hair dryers set up just on the blowing cold air so they don't overheat. Again, it's really easy for them to get too hot. And we use little combs too to pick out any mats or knots that they might have. I have another video, we'll see if it works, of Rocky learning to groom. This was Rocky on my lap, and you should never set a baby sea otter on your lap because they'll get too hot because your lap's warm. But I wanted to get a video of him because he was really cute. So don't ever do this. If you're ever grooming a sea otter pup, don't put him on your lap. I also learned Rocky didn't like that grooming process as much as other sea otter pups I had worked with. So after he was dry and fluffy, I would let him kind of hang out in his crib on that water bed and kind of groom himself to sleep. And this little Jasper, the funny thing about this video is he still does this. He suckles on his side when he's going to sleep. So he would always have this little wet spot on his side because he would mouth and suckle on it. And then this is Rocky and Jasper when they were a little bit bigger. They got to have slumber parties, so they were hanging out together. And to summarize all of this and to put it all together, this is a breakdown of one of their days. This is one of the records we kept at the Rehabilitation Center, and we carried that over to our paperwork here at the Minnesota Zoo. But record keeping is really important. You want to track their progress and document how they're doing. And so every day we would have a sheet like this, and at the start of a shift, which started at 12 a.m., we would make all those circles. Like every 2 hours, we would want to take a temperature on Rocky. That's how important their temperature is. We are constantly taking body temps on these little guys. And then you can see for this day, there was 1, 2, 3 weights planned. We actually got 4. They happened almost at the right times. And then I believe he was on some sort of medication. This was on August 4th, so I wasn't up there yet. And then we track every time they go potty in those little tubs, and they go a lot because they eat a lot. And then he was eating every 3 hours. So this is what we talked about a little bit earlier when we were calculating his diet. He was eating 153 grams of formula every 3 hours. And in addition to this, we would keep another record, just kind of a running log of what the otter pup did, how it was doing, how it was looking, how it was grooming, if it was grooming sufficiently on its own, if any milestones that it reached that day. So we were keeping track of all of this, taking all the temps, the weights, the potties, recording every time they ate, how much they ate. In addition to this, our staff would have to wash those fluffy towels to groom them, sanitize all of the dishes, clean out all of those bins that they went potty in, sanitize their nursery, change out the ice packs in their cribs so that they would stay nice and cool. And that was just for Rocky. We also had Jasper. So we were pretty busy on these shifts. There was only one of us working with the 2 sea otter pups. And so it was a little crazy and hectic sometimes, but they were awfully fun to work with. Once the pups are stabilized and they're able to travel, we start making plans to get them back to the facility that they're going to. So we're getting ready to bring them back to the Minnesota Zoo, and at the end of August, Rocky, Jasper, and I, and a veterinarian, made the journey back to the Minnesota Zoo. So this is us in our first class accommodations on our flight. We were actually on a cargo pallet on a FedEx plane. We flew as cargo. And we left Seward at 10 a.m., left Anchorage at 2, sat on the tarmac in Indianapolis for about 3 hours in the middle of the night at the FedEx terminal, and then finally made it home to Minnesota, and we all did pretty well. This is Rocky and I hanging out. When you work with sea otter pups, you get to do things like wear these cool yellow wader things, but they help to keep you dry and warm. The FedEx people were great. They kept our cabin temperature the way we wanted it, about 55 to 60 degrees, so that the pups could hang out and not get too hot or overheated. They even made us brownies and brought us brownies back to the cargo hold. And they'd come in and check on us every once in a while and see how Rocky and Jasper were doing. And this is just a really short video of us on the plane. At this point, the pups are both asleep. Oh, I grabbed my camera. And this was my surroundings that night on the flight back from Anchorage. There's little Rocky. And then Jasper decided he needed to sleep on all of the clean towels. And I went, hey, if that's where you want to sleep, go for it. And so that was our journey back to the Minnesota Zoo. I thought that was kind of fun because a lot of people ask about how we move animals, and a lot of people don't get that behind-the-scenes look. So meanwhile, back at the ranch, little Capers was hanging out with his people friends, waiting for us to come back. But when he heard about Jasper and Rocky's arrival, he wasn't too happy. He had a few choice words. He was the center of attention until these 2 little guys came about. But Rocky and Jasper's transport went great. We did a quarantine here at the zoo to make sure they were nice and healthy before they got to meet Capers. We did wean them off of formula, so they were entirely on solid food before we let them meet Capers. We made sure that they were able to navigate their pool, dive to the bottom. They were able to groom on their own, and that they had gained some weight before we introduced them to Mr. Capers. And eventually, they all got to meet and hang out. And so these are our 3 boys. This was actually in our holding pool, which was our temporary holding pool before we moved into Russia's Grizzly Coast exhibit. And just for reference, that pool is right below all of you guys. That's where we raised these guys. And so this is Jasper, Rocky, and Capers. Am I getting that right? You can see Capers is a little bit bigger than the other 2 at this point. So this was pretty early on in their introduction. And so that was a little bit about our journey with Jasper and Rocky. It was quite an adventure. Jasper's quite inquisitive. If you're ever out in front of our sea otter exhibit, Jasper's the one that's cruising around the windows and hanging out with everybody. So he'd be happy to answer all of your questions. But in case I forget, Rocky would like to thank you all for joining us tonight at the Minnesota Zoo. And we have a little time for questions. Okay. Yeah, right there. The question is the pool that they're in now salt water? Yes, it is. Having them in salt water is really important for their coats. So if you remember back to that video footage of all the little totes and bins that they were swimming in the Alaska Sea Life Center, that water actually came straight from the ocean out of Resurrection Bay. It was cold, but all of the water that the pups swam in, grew up in, that was all salt water, because otherwise it's not good for their coats. And so once we got back here, we would make our own salt water back in the holding area where they were. We actually made that by hand as well. That was another thing that we got to do. Yeah, what's your question? Right. Her comment was the raising of the pups at Monterey Bay Aquarium was quite different than the Alaska Sea Life Center. I forgot to touch on this, so I'm glad that you brought it up, because it is a very distinct point in the way that they handle their pups. As I told you a little bit earlier, rehabilitation's main goal is to get the animals back out there. They do not have the capability that Monterey Bay does with their surrogacy program. Monterey Bay is able to do that because they have 4 or 5 females that live there. For certain reasons, those females were not able to be released. And so those females are the ones that play the role of the surrogates. They always stay there at the aquarium. And then they're put through that rehabilitation program and then put back out in the wild. Alaska Sea Life Center doesn't have that capability in that they don't have a permanent collection of females that resides there. So they do not have the option to participate in that surrogacy program. And Monterey Bay has done a lot of research on how we can successfully re-release sea otter pups that come in at such a young age. Well, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the people that oversee everyone, has stepped in and said, you know what, when they are raised by people, we cannot teach them how to live well in the wild. And so when they come in, the efforts are to stabilize, support those pups, and then place them in zoos and aquariums, because we have found otters that don't have that mother to teach them how to survive, which they cannot do in Alaska because they don't have those females. They do things like molest humans when they're diving, climb on kayaks. They just get in trouble. They don't have a physical facility to house a permanent collection of sea otters. It probably won't. It's a very time-intensive thing. Having exhibit sea otters is a very expensive endeavor. They do a lot of work rehabilitating other animals, and any prime age sea otter, any otter over 6 or 8 months old, once they stabilize it, their goal is to put it back out into the wild. But they do a lot of work with seals, sea lions, marine birds. When I was up that summer in Alaska, there was 26 seals and sea lions that they were rehabilitating, and their goal with all of those animals was to put them back out there in the wild. So it's kind of how. Okay. Um, what is their life expectancy? In the wild, males live typically 10 to 15 years old. Females live 15 to 20 years old. In zoos and aquariums, we're finding they're living into their 20s. Healthy animals are living longer lives here at the zoo. To answer your question about pups, they wean their pups about every 6 to 8 months. So female sea otter can start having pups as early as 2 or 3 years old. They could potentially have a pup every 6 to 8 months, so approximately 1 or 2 a year. And if they're living 15 years, that's a lot of pups, depending on depending on how many they have, how frequently they reproduce, how soon they wean their babies. Some babies will stay with mom about 12 months. So there's a lot of factors that come into play. One more question. I'll take one over here.
Just a question. Surrogates are not pregnant. How are they kept lactating?
Actually, they don't lactate. So that's an interesting question. That's one thing. That's where the human care comes in. Once the pups are stabilized, about a 2-week period, then they'll introduce them to the surrogate. What we didn't see is how they're feeding that pup formula. They'll actually teach the moms to come over to this kind of panel, and they'll bottle feed the pup through the panel if it's still bottle feeding, and then slowly wean it. The pup at the beginning of the video that was with the sea otter named Tula, that pup did look like it was nursing on her, and what I could speculate about that is that she might have been lactating because she just lost a pup, but generally the surrogate moms don't lactate, and so it's all, the calories are all coming from their human caretakers at that point.
Great. Thank you, Melanie.
Yes.
I have a feeling all of you are going to look at the Russia's Grizzly Coast Sea Otter exhibit a little bit differently now that you kind of have the backstory and some of those great infant photos. So I want to invite you guys to come back, especially if you had a good time tonight. We do have more of these in the new sessions for now until February. We're just put online recently if you haven't checked it out. But our next one in October is Dr. Ann Savage. She's wonderful. She's worked decades with the cotton top tamarin, which is a really tiny 1-pound cool monkey with kind of like a big mohawky kind of head that lives in Colombia. And so she's going to be coming here and chatting a little bit about her conservation work and success stories there. So I hope you come back in October. And just want to say have a good night. Please exit the same way that you came in and drive safe. Thank you guys for coming. Bye.
Hey, sweetie.